Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Sacred Anarchies, a post-church podcast. I'm Maria French, and I am here with the infamous and most beloved and most knowledgeable Barry Taylor.
Most knowledgeable? Wow,
Most knowledgeable because as I was introducing you, I had in my head the Monday musing we did last night and how you were just like bam, bam, bam with all like this music knowledge. And I thought, yeah, most
bam, bam,
knowledgeable.
bam, bam, bam.
Bam.
Bam! It's bam. Oh my God, we've already gone off the rails.
I know,
It took
totally.
less than a minute and we're already in the bam, bam, bam.
Well, I will say, speaking of Monday musings, I really enjoy our Monday musings. If you're listening to this and you're a podcast listener and you like what we do this, but we do it a little bit more casual, probably a little bit more impromptu. There is no editing that happens, and you just get raw, unadulterated unplugged us. And that happens on Instagram Live every single Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific and 8 p.m. UK. We have a lot of fun. We kind of have a little bit of a cult following. We have the usuals, which I love.
Yes, we do. And of course, it's so much less professional than this because
Oh, yeah.
this is so professional. It's not even funny.
We're so fancy on the podcast. No, not really, but there is some level of prep. Actually, there is some level of prep to Monday musings because we do have to decide what we're going to muse about, make sure we're prepared to talk about it. But I don't know. We talk about things on musings that we probably wouldn't talk about the podcast because the podcast serves the vision of Sacred Anarchies, a post-church podcast. So it's really always theological, and our Monday musings aren't always theological. So, but I had this in my head last night because it's a continuation of Monday musings. We're going to be talking briefly about a really important moment in Bob Dylan's career. We talked about Bob Dylan on Monday musings last night because for those of you who don't know, it was his 80th birthday yesterday, and we thought it would be really great to pay him some tribute, and everyone loved it because a lot of people who were tuning in were really big Bob Dylan fans. But he obviously, and Barry, you're a huge fan and you know a lot about Dylan, and he obviously has a lot of moments in his career that have been very famous and very historical and very groundbreaking for music, poetry, lyrics, all of that.
Yeah.
But what we're going to specifically talk about briefly today, and I say briefly because I think it's going to be one of those things that we just say, we don't commentate a ton about, and we just kind of close because I think it's really powerful. And I think it's quite theological, quite human, dynamic, very much sort of alive and living and breathing. And when you tell this story, or when one tells this story, you can't help but empathize. You can't help but, I think, see your story in it. And you're either on the side of Dylan or you're kind of on the side of the crowd. But I think it's something that connects with everyone. And it's theological, highly theological, because we've used it quite a bit as we've talked often about what we call innovative theology, which is, innovating and reimagining and really reconfiguring and transfiguring theological paradigms and ideas and concepts as we move forward into new worlds. So with that being said, we want to take a few minutes to honor Dylan and a really important moment in his life. So Baz, why don't you start out the story and I'll kind of fill in a little bit since I did that big intro.
So in the long arc of Bob Dylan's career, as you said, there have been lots of moments, but I think one of the early and probably most significant moments, and it was captured actually in a documentary about him, is, Dylan started out as a folk singer,
Yeah.
and he did basically pretty much what folk singers did. He sang old songs, reinterpreted sort of classic American songs and like that, stuff like that. But
He did
there
a
was,
lot of protest songs, which are really important for his fans.
well, yeah, but at first stuff he started doing, covers of like classic folk Americana, and played acoustic guitar. But in the like years 1965 to 66, he made three incredible albums, and also went from acoustic music to electric music. He changed everything and went from being a solo performer with a guitar to a man with a band. And not everybody loved this. In fact, I think it's safe to say that the majority of his fans really felt were very upset by it. And Dylan went on tour, and he was playing in Manchester here in Britain. In
Yeah, was.
I think it was the summer of 1966.
It was actually May 16th, so we just kind of passed the anniversary.
That's right, yeah, May 16th.
Um,
So he was playing some songs, and at the end of a song, there was a lot of booing, and somebody, because they didn't like the fact that he was playing with the band, and somebody yelled out, and it was caught on tape, Judas.
mm,
And the remarkable moment, really, and I'll tell you why I think it's really both transformative and theological, is there's a lot of pressure that comes with that, because here's a guy who's trying to have a career in music, and even though he's like well liked and stuff like that, there's an audience, and you want your audience to like what you do. I
yeah,
mean,
of course.
it's a very natural human thing. And to call somebody a Judas is to really challenge the essence of who they are, because Judas in our world is the supreme figure of the betrayal of ideals.
Yeah.
I mean, is there anybody that we like gets more vilified than Judas in terms of like our whole culture? And Dylan's response was remarkable, because he turned around to his band,
Mhm.
and on the heels of that, he said three straightforward words. He just said, "Play fucking loud." And they launched into Like a Rolling Stone, which is really a song about the very thing that he was accused of. Because and what struck me about the moment is not that he just said, "Oh, play loud," and
Yeah.
was, that what was in it, what I think is really significant is Dylan was called a betrayer,
Yeah.
a Judas, because he betrayed the hopes and dreams of his audience. But Dylan refused to betray himself,
Exactly.
and I think it's a really tough lesson, and I think it's significant that it came early in his career, and I think that resolve is profound, because it could have all gone wrong. There were no guarantees. There aren't any guarantees in life, and and people did walk
Could have
out.
killed his career, and people do kill their careers often when they stray away from a
And
trajectory that they've put themselves on, that people have supported them
yeah,
in.
and he's done that over and over throughout his career. I mean, when he sort of had his Christian conversion in the late 70s and early 80s, he wouldn't sing any of his old songs, and he
Mm,
just sang all of his new gospel songs, and people walked out of his concerts and they didn't sell out, and he didn't stop. And then he recorded, 3 albums back to back of like covers of like Frank Sinatra songs. He made a crap Christmas album, and throughout his entire career, he's remained true to himself and refused to betray himself. And I just think it's really interesting, because I can think of the number of times that we're tempted to
mhm,
betray what we really want,
mhm.
because those
Absolutely.
around us want something from us, and they're disappointed if we don't give them what they want. And we live in this era where we're told all the time, you have to give people what they want. It's the dominant thing on social media. You need to find out what people want and give it to them. They do it with marketing and all this kind of stuff. And in the middle of that stands somebody like Dylan. He's not alone, but he's one of the rare ones who is very iconoclastic and refuses to give up his own mission for the sake of other people's comfort.
Absolutely. And I find the whole thing not only incredibly inspiring, but ironic, because you have, I mean, when we think of someone like Bob Dylan, you think of just 100% creative artist, someone who is constantly reinventing, rebirthing, reimagining his craft, himself in the world. So you expect his fans to be very sort of amenable and adaptable to the way the art will present itself day after day, month after month, year after year. But what happens is, or what happens often, and certainly with Dylan, he put his art out in the world, which set his fans on a particular trajectory. They got used to it. They came to have a certain expectation, and then they started to project those expectations on Dylan. And when he decided to go in different artistic directions, they wanted that trajectory because they all of a sudden became the obvious consumer. They became the sort of in I think in their own minds the owners of him and his work and his craft, and really tried to control it through fandom. And it's interesting, and like you said, Dylan just refused to have it and was just like, well, nope, this is what we're doing, and guess what, band, we're going to play fucking loud. You're going to call me a Judas. This is what we're going to do. And again, like you said, it wasn't to just be like an fu moment, but it was just bigger than that. It was bigger than the crowd. It was really about, like you said, Dylan not betraying himself. And I think that is such a fine line that everybody struggles with. And it's
Absolutely.
certainly not lost on our crowd and our listeners as people are moving from traditional notions and communities that claim Christianity, um, you know, um,
Well, it's the
trying
biggest.
to not betray, who they were, who they think God might be, who their community understands them to be, but at the same time trying to live out their own stories with integrity, without compromise, and in a way that is true to themselves. And I just think that's really difficult. And so you come across a story like this, and it kind of gives you a little bit more of that chutzpah to continue. The interesting thing is, I was reading through the transcript earlier because I knew we were going to chat about this today. And before, so the Judas was yelled out
Yeah,
right before he started playing Like a Rolling Stone, which is amazing because Like a Rolling Stone became like just a massively popular, everyone knows that song, right? But he had played more than several songs before he
yeah,
got to that. And the crowd was building up, building up. You could tell that with every song he played, they grew more unhappy, they grew nastier, there were less claps. At one point, Dylan even kind of made a joke saying, oh, don't clap too much for me, because there was almost no claps.
yeah,
And when the comment, or when, the guy yelled out Judas, before Dylan said play fucking loud, he actually said two other things first. He talked back to the guy in the crowd and he said, I don't believe you and you're a liar.
yeah,
And then he turned to his band and said, play fucking loud. And I was like, well, that's an interesting part of the story that I didn't know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And just
Yeah,
thinking about what he might have meant and what it means to turn to someone that calls us fake, that
yeah.
tries to invalidate our story, that tries to invalidate where we know we're going in life and what is right for us and what is good for us and what we need, to look at them and say, you're a liar. You're not a truth teller about my life and my story. You cannot tell the truth about who I am. And I don't believe you. The things that you're saying about me, I don't believe.
Yeah.
So in light of that, I'm going to play fucking loud.
Which tells you something that
Yeah.
someone, because that was 1966.
66. Yeah.
That's 34. That's 55 years ago. So he was 20, 25.
And the resolve and like the
I mean,
self-resignation, you can
that's
afford
what
to,
I
yeah,
mean.
at
To
25.
have that resolve at 25, because I was thinking about, the way that we can get caught. This happens a lot in churches,
Oh my
where
God. Yeah.
people want things a certain way, and if you make a move, you're betraying the ideals of the organization or the community or stuff like that. And the challenge in all of that is, there's so much dependency and even loyalty, and I think um, it's just very interesting that um, you would have this kind of issue so early on and then be so resolved. And it's interesting because one of the great lines in Like a Rolling Stone is, no direction home. And what's really interesting about that is, while Dylan knew that he wasn't going back, he didn't necessarily know where he was going.
Right.
And that's the title. There's a really interesting documentary that Martin Scorsese put together that you can find probably online somewhere, called No Direction Home, where you can actually see footage of this moment. and the documentary is called No Direction Home. And I think that's the thing as well. The resolve was there, even though the direction wasn't set. It just wasn't backwards.
Yeah,
And I,
he knew where he wasn't going even though he didn't know where he was.
and I think sometimes, you know, it's that same thing. It's a bit like, if we're going to get theological, it's a bit like Abraham. He set out not knowing where he was going. That's kind of a profound thing, I think.
I think so too. And that's why I love this story, and, I think that's why you love telling it, because 'cause I've heard you say it on more than one occasion, and it's always really powerful, so
I've always been I've always been fascinated by the figure of Judas, and the whole notion of betrayal, because I've betrayed myself along the way.
I'll have.
I've made choices and decisions that I knew were accommodations
Mhm.
to things that I didn't really want to do, and the fruit of that was always problematic.
Yeah, absolutely.
So follow Bob.
There you have it. Play fucking loud, people. That's what we're gonna title this podcast. There'll probably be an asterisk in there somewhere, but and now we have to label this podcast as we have had to so many times before.
Oh, really? What do we have to label it?
Explicit, I think.
Oh, really? That's explicit?
Well, if we curse, I have to put a label. I have to
Oh, play fucking loud.
play fucking loud, people. Make the explicit rating worth it for us. And that's it. Anything else you can say?
No,
Baz.
short and sweet is good, don't you?
Yep, absolutely. If you want to hear Baz play a little bit of Dylan, head to our IGTV from last night, our Monday musings, and he had everyone in tears. We're thankful he played. So good. All right, everyone. We'll see you next week for another episode. Thanks for joining us.
Joining us, everybody. Play loud.
Okay, play loud.